I have some terrible and I'm sure shocking news to tell all of you, especially given everything that's going on. Brexit, not done. The transition period is set to end on the 31st of December, and the deadline to extend that date is on the 30th of June, in just 9 weeks' time. And as Michel Barnier, the chief EU negotiator, reminded us today,
le gouvernement britannique nous a indiqué et confirmé durant ce round qu'il refuserait toute prolongation de la période de transition.
Now, before we dive into today's press conference, let's remember where we are. Right now, under the exit deal, we've left the EU, but we're still in the EU system of rules, which means that anything made in the UK is automatically legal to sell across the 27 countries of the EU without any costly checks, restrictions, or tariffs. And given that those are the closest countries to us, and we do half of our trade with them, that's pretty important. And at the end of this year, if there's no extension, we'll either have a new trade deal that hopes to maintain some of that, or we'll have no deal at all. And given that not one of you watching this can name a country that doesn't have a single trade deal with anyone within 2,000 miles, that would mean doing something that every successful economy on the world has chosen not to do. So what's happening right now? After a week of negotiations, obviously over the phone, Michel Barnier has reported that the UK has submitted some proposals in some areas, but not all. But you can't share them with us because the UK says they have to stay confidential. So here's where the fun begins.
There will be no ambitious trade deal without an ambitious level playing field on open and fair competition.
Now, what he's saying there is that if the UK had full and free access to sell its services and goods to the EU market, but UK companies didn't have to follow any of the EU's rules, then UK businesses would be at an unfair advantage over EU businesses. And yet...
Mais le Royaume-Uni n'a pas voulu s'engager sérieusement sur un certain nombre de points fondamentaux. It also denounced the basic premise that economic interconnectedness and geographic proximity require robust guarantees. Yet again, this is what we agreed with Boris Johnson in our joint political declaration.
Now, I don't like to say I told you so. Actually, I kind of love it, but I don't like the fact that I turned out to be more right than I planned to be. Because check out what I was saying last year before the election. Because the political declaration in Boris Johnson's Brexit deal says we'll have comprehensive, deep regulatory cooperation. Now what that means is following the rules of the EU, but no longer having any say. And if it's not true, it means we're starting our negotiations with the EU on a lie, meaning the next phase of negotiations is going to be even more fun than the last. We will be entering the most complicated and crucial negotiations in British history with completely inconsistent positions between what Boris Johnson has promised the people and between what he's agreed with the EU.
It argued that our positions are too far apart to reach an agreement.
Now that's a problem that's arisen this week specifically because the Tory party's election manifesto plans never matched up with the political declaration that they signed beforehand. Now when I said that this would make the next phase of negotiations more fun, I was expecting we'd have to negotiate an international trade deal infinitely more complicated than the one that took us 3.5 years in about a few months, starting from a position of having already broken a previous agreement with the threat of becoming the most economically isolated country on the planet hanging over our heads. I was not expecting a global pandemic, meaning that all that would have to happen over Skype. He then went on to say that our government refused to make a firm commitment to staying within the European Convention on Human Rights. What that means in effect is, our government refused to commit to not scrapping the Human Rights Act. He reminded us that if we want to continue the police and security cooperation with our 27 neighbours, then we're going to need to follow the same rules on human rights and data protection, so that those countries know that if they share information with us about a suspect, we'll use that info in the right way. Also turns out that even though Brexit was supposed to be about getting back control of our waters and our fish, the UK hasn't even submitted a legal text on fisheries, and Barnier reminded us that
the EU will not agree to any future economic partnership that does not include a balanced, sustainable and long-term solution on fisheries.
And when a reporter asked whether the UK might be forced to pay into an EU coronavirus recovery fund, Barnier responded,
En toutes circonstances, le Royaume-Uni ne participera pas au prochain cadre financier pluriannuel ni au prochain programme. Il ne participera donc pas à un plan de reprise mis en œuvre après l'année 2020.
Now, frankly, I've had enough of people saying that because of coronavirus, we shouldn't be discussing Brexit. As Michel Barnier himself says,
La crise sanitaire, économique, sociale d'aujourd'hui nous crée, me semble-t-il, une responsabilité supplémentaire à nous, Européens, et aux Britanniques, pour bâtir dans les mois qui viennent ce partenariat ambitieux et durable entre nous.
the doctors and nurses who you've been clapping because they've been risking their lives to save the lives of the people that you love, they've been screaming for literally years to avoid a no-deal Brexit at all costs because it would ruin the NHS. To turn around and then allow a no-deal Brexit to happen just months later would be one of the greatest betrayals in British history. Not to mention the fact that we saw the shelves empty this year because people panicked about the supply of food. Well, guess what? 1/3 of all the food in the UK comes from EU countries, and that's on the line in this Brexit negotiation. With everything that the people of the United Kingdom are going through right now, we simply cannot afford to stumble from one crisis into another.